Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
A first-of-its-kind historic site for the Buffalo Soldiers will be coming to the Maryland Eastern Shore. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. With the exception of the Buffalo Soldiers House in Easton, there are a few monuments to these men east of the Mississippi. They originated with the United States colored troops that initially served as settlers, moved westward. We have in our studio this morning Althea Chandler, who has been involved in developing the project, and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So tell me then a little bit about how you became involved with this idea of making this site.
I had a dream about it. In 2021, my sisters and I were trying to decide how to use our family property. And we had looked in several avenues, and none of that worked out to our satisfaction. And I just happened to have a dream about using our family property to be a living history site. I shared it with my sisters, and we started working on it in 2021. It's three of us that own the property, co-owners of the property. And we've been trying to decide since 1997 as to what to do with this property.
Why the Buffalo Soldiers?
Because my grandfather, or my maternal grandfather, was a Buffalo Soldier by the name of Thomas Elsie Polk Sr., who was a native of Allen. And he started purchasing property in Allen when he finished his last enlistment as a Buffalo Soldier in 1892. And that property, which is about 25 and a half acres, has been consistently owned by our family for now 131 years. So it's been passed down through the generations, and so that's what my dream was about. Well, let's just make this something to honor grandfather.
Do you know much about him?
Yes.
What was he like, or what?
Well, I never met
Obviously,
him.
yeah.
He died 15 years before I was born. But our mother told us about him when we were children. They said, your grandfather was a Buffalo Soldier. He fought out west, helped settle the country, and told us certain things. And then she showed us letters that he had written to his father when he was stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, Fort Riley in Kansas. And we were like, this is interesting. And then in 1998, I, along with some cousins of mine, formed a Buffalo Soldier chapter of the 9th and 10th Horse Cavalry National Association of the Buffalo Soldiers. And that's when I learned more about the Buffalo Soldiers. When I joined that association and started going to their reunions all across the country. And I met World War II veterans who were, had been Buffalo Soldiers during World War II. Matter of fact, I really didn't know much about Buffalo Soldiers until I joined that association. And they enlightened me a lot as to the fact that it wasn't just out west. It continued all the way up through the Korean War. Because the armed services were segregated, racially segregated, until 1954 was the supposedly last of the segregated armed
Units,
services. That President Harry Truman had signed an order ending segregation in the armed services in 1948. But just like Brown versus Board of Education, it took a while to have that enforced.
Right.
So I learned all of that about the Buffalo Soldiers going to their conventions.
In reading his letters and what you heard from your mother, did you get a sense about what he was like?
Some. There was only like 2 or 3 letters.
Uh-huh.
And some of the things were like talking about his sister's husband, He didn't think he was any good in the beginning, and he was glad to hear that they were separating and things like that. But this is personal stuff
Right.
between him and his father. But throughout the years, she told us, how he loved to walk, he loved to bake, that he really, really loved the United States. Matter of fact, she's the one that told me that he loved the United States so much that he named his first son Ulysses Samuel Arthur so that his initials would be USA Polk. And the fact that he, liked to study history because he named him after 3 presidents. So I learned that from my mother. As I said, he died in 1940. So we didn't know any of our grandparents.
In terms of the Buffalo Soldiers, can you bring us through a little bit of the history? I mean, and I mentioned this a moment ago, that they were certainly were known with the soldiers out west. I guess the Native Americans named them, as a matter of fact. Tell me a little bit about that, and give me a sense of the history as to who these people were.
Okay. Well, the Civil War ended in 1865, and the expansion out west was continuing during the Civil War. And matter of fact, there was a Homestead Act, I believe it was 1862, that encouraged people to go out and settle property for nominal fee, like $50 or whatever. So the expansion was really growing. And after the war, with all the casualties, I think it was 180,000 casualties during the Civil War. The Army was having a hard time finding people to sign up in the Army again, 16 months later after the Civil War. So that's when they decided to open up 6 original segregated units for what they call colored troops. And that was in July of 1866. And as I said, there were 6 units, the 9th and 10th Cavalry units, and then the other 4 were infantry units. Then they were trained in the Southwest, and they started, the 10th Cavalry mostly was in Texas, and the 9th Cavalry was mostly in Oklahoma. So all of the Buffalo Soldiers were stationed west of the Mississippi for several reasons. One of them being that, especially with the Civil War just ending, they wouldn't have been received well in the South with weapons. So it's best to keep them to the west of the Mississippi. And as I said, it was hard to get white civilians to sign up for the Army again. And there were millions of blacks that were displaced after the Civil War. They couldn't get jobs anywhere. They couldn't get training anywhere. There were the vagrancy laws in the South. If you were found not having a home, you could be picked up and put in prison. So all of that was going on. So it was very lucrative to find black men that were looking for some type of way to improve their life. And I think that's why my grandfather joined.
Because one of the things I read was that the Native Americans actually seemed to coin this phrase, and out of respect.
Yes, they did. It is believed that it was the Cheyenne Indians that first coined the phrase Buffalo Soldiers, because as you can imagine, in the 1860s, black men being soldiers were called all kinds of names. And most of them weren't respectful names. So when the Indians or the Native Americans started referring to them as the Buffalo Soldiers, and they say for 2 reasons. Either that they thought that the black soldiers were fierce fighters, and they reminded them that as a buffalo gets wounded, then he fights even harder. And also they're saying that the mane of the buffalo's fur resembled the Negro soldier's hair. So they are the ones that chose the term Buffalo Soldiers, and The black soldiers liked that because they knew that the Native Americans respected the buffalo. The buffalo was sacred to them. So that's how they chose to keep that name.
And they also participated in the Spanish-American War. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, they participated in the Mexican War, the Spanish-American War, the Filipino War, World War I, World War II, Korean War, Spanish-American War in Cuba started in 1898. And I believe it was most of the 10th Cavalry and the 28th Infantry Division or unit were sent to Cuba. Now, the 9th Cavalry was there also, but your largest amount of soldiers were from the 10th Cavalry and the 28th. And as a matter of fact, it is noted, and there are historical newspaper articles that prove that the 9th and the 10th Cavalry were involved in the charge of San Juan Hill, and that they actually, relieved the Rough Riders. Not that the Rough Riders did all of the fighting and no one else did. It was a joint collaboration. But as Teddy Roosevelt started running for president, he's, trying to get the South vote, would not say anything complimentary about the Buffalo Soldiers. He said derogatory things about the Buffalo Soldiers. And that's how history got twisted.
Because that's ironic because obviously he was a Republican.
Yes, but he was, but different time period.
Sure.
So.
Also, I understand that General Pershing, during the First World War, known as Blackjack Pershing, got that name in relationship to how he viewed these units.
Yes. He was one of the, when the Buffalo Soldiers were first formed, all of their officers were white. And of course, you had most of the white officers did not want to become in charge of the Buffalo Soldier units because they thought it would be detrimental to their careers. Okay. Armstrong Custer was one of the main ones that said he would not take on the colored troops. But Jack Black Pershing was one of the few that was eager to do so, and he sent out many positive reports about the soldiers that he commanded, and that's how he got the middle name of Black.
One of the things that strikes me in all of this is that many African-American men particularly joined the service, and particularly after the First World War, certainly the Second World War as well, that there was a sense that they would earn the respect of whites in America. But that doesn't seem to have necessarily been the case, particularly after the First World War.
That was the case after both wars.
Right. Stand corrected.
Well, again, considering the time period, what type of jobs were available for Black men across this country? Where could they really get training? And one of the saddest things that I've discovered in my researching about this is that after these men served in World War I and World War II, they came back. They were not allowed to get the training that their white soldiers received. Weren't allowed to get housing. You've heard of red line districting, I'm sure. And that's really sad because, they sacrificed their lives. And of course they knew they weren't going to be treated fairly. I mean, they were not, ignorant to the fact that segregation was still going on in the United States. But they wanted to prove to the people in the United States that the Black man could fight and represent this country just as well as anyone else. And that's why they went.
Because I've read about, particularly after the First World War, this is the thing that stuck in my mind, is that it could be dangerous for a Black man after the First World War to walk around in his uniform, particularly in the South.
Yes, very much so.
I mean, it just seems as if that must be devastating. Or did they expect it, do you think?
I think they probably expected it.
Yeah.
But you remember they were segregated in their units.
Right.
You know, they were probably told, they were given minimal jobs. They didn't want them to actually be in combat. They were given jobs to dig ditches and things like that, or burying the dead, just like what they did during the Civil War. During the Civil War, the black troops stayed longer than the white troops because they had to go around to different battlefields and bury the dead corpse for close to a year. If you go back and look at military records, you'll see that lots of the black troops, the United States colored troops, were not discharged from the Army until 1867. Why? Because they were going around the country burying corpses. So this is the type of details that they were given. So they knew, when they came back to America from overseas, that they weren't going. They may have hoped, but they knew the reality of segregation in the United States when they enlisted.
So this exhibit that you want to put together, what do you think it's going to be looking like? I mean, I assume it's in the planning stages. What sense you get about if somebody goes there, when it's completed, what are they going to see?
Well, the current house that we have is in bad shape, but it was built in the 1960s after the house that my grandfather built in the 1920s was destroyed by a fire in 1962. So our current house will be turned into our visiting center. And in the visitor center, we will have exhibits for people to see, historical exhibits dealing with all aspects of the Buffalo Soldiers. And we will have workshops and interactive exhibits and activities for people. We will have volunteers to be reenacting the Buffalo Soldiers from different time periods, not just the Indian Wars. Of course, we will have a lot about our grandfather because the land is the land that he purchased and it's been passed down to us through these 131 years. But we want to cover the entire legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers. Once we thought about it, we realized this is going to be something new for the eastern coast of the United States, not just the eastern shore of Maryland. As I said, the association that I belong to, the National Association of Buffalo Soldiers, it's been in existence since the 1960s. And when you go across the Mississippi, there are monuments. There are monuments at Fort Sill. Of course, there's the National Buffalo Soldier Monument that General Colin Powell was instrumental in forming. That's at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So you have those different areas and monuments. There's a museum at the home place of Colonel Charles Young, who was if I believe right, he was the fourth black graduate from the West Point. So, but you don't have anything east of the Mississippi really, except for the monument that they just put up at West Point, honoring the equestrian trainers that the Buffalo Soldiers were there for years for the cadets. So,
what's been the community response to this idea? You getting funding, or what's the situation?
We are seeking funding. We have started with Hattie's Trail, which was started last year, and we've received funding from the Chesapeake Bay Trust and a mini grant for that, and Preservation Trust of Wacomico was our fiscal sponsor for that. So we are in the process of applying for other grants, and we've had some local fraternities, willing to help support us. We have the support of Somerset County NAACP, the Allen Historical Society. Salisbury University was involved in the first phase of the trail, and UMES was involved with it in October of last year as far as laying down the mulch and stuff. So, yes, we are actively seeking grants and getting very good responses.
Well, we were speaking with Althea Chandler. She's been involved in developing a Buffalo Soldiers house, that is, an exhibit, at least.
Living history.
Living history.
Site.
And we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and we look forward to finally, any ideas when it'll be completed?
We are shooting for 2025
Okay.
to open to the public, free to the public.
Well, I appreciate you stopping by.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening. Delmarva Today with Don Rush.